Good morning. There's a fundamental law, and that is this: traffic is a function of the available road space. This means that predict and provide, which is what we used to do, is no longer necessary or appropriate. We've moved instead to something called vision and validate. Decide what you want to see and design to achieve it. In a highway sense, now, we're using capacity as a tool, not as something to be achieved, not as an asset to be maximized, for instance. We may reduce capacity as often as increasing it. And this approach reflects, if you like, the changing mindsets of society. In any event, we were seeing a difference in the mindsets of each generation. For instance, the millennials, for them, the internet, this was new and shiny. They embraced the sharing economy. And it's as these generations come of age that the policies of the future are created. Past mindsets have led to these converging trends across Europe, which is less reliance on driving. But change now is actually happening faster than the policies can be rewritten. For the current younger generation, the cause célèbre, which will shape our policies for the foreseeable future, is climate change. So instead of using predict and provide, the more visionary cities are using this vision and validate approach. They're reducing road space and seeing a consequent reduction in miles driven, with congestion remaining roughly a constant. And to make climate change, which we all talk about, happen, we actually need big plans, not little plans. We need to adapt the vision and validate approach. And this is the scale of change that we need to make to hit our current targets. And in terms of that change, surface transport is the highest carbon emitting sector, which also means it's the biggest potential big win. The scale should not be underestimated. Even last year, with the pandemic, where we saw emissions drop, carbon emissions drop by about 30% at their peak, half of which due to surface transport, we are still off target compared with the Paris Agreement 2050, let alone the 2035 target we're now setting ourselves for low carbon living. So the RTPI understood the severity of this issue last year, and they created a project to look at place-based solutions to solve transport carbon. How spatial planning can deliver net zero carbon transport. And we were involved in this study alongside LDA Design and City Science. This project took fictional areas representing typical places in England in terms of carbon impact and land use and activity, and considered how decarbonisation barriers could be overcome. And what came out of this study were ambitious vision plans for each of these areas, illustrating and quantifying how combinations of these solutions can indeed achieve a zero carbon or low carbon transport network at different scales. So as part of this study, we developed this SAM framework. What we found out, what we now know, is that transport is the third question, not the first. The first question is, can I do it online? The second question is, can I do it online and get it delivered? And only then do we come to the third question, do I need to travel? And we have gone forward in this way, looking at, do we need to travel? As the first port of call for do we need to travel is, can I do it by active travel? And then second, can I do it by shared travel? And the place-based approach enables us to design for these higher priority forms of transport right from the outset. So as part of this project, we developed a set of 40 interventions to reduce surface transport emissions for each of the 3 tiers of the framework. They also go to health, economy and social inclusion. The aim was to find this decarbonisation pathway to net zero carbon by 2030, as it happens, which is the targets of many dozens of councils in the UK at the moment. We undertook carbon modelling, and we looked at the effectiveness of various shifts in attitudes and behaviour. And when you look at the report, you'll see a menu of items. We go through each particular measure and identify how effective they are likely to be. So as part of this, of course, mobility is phygital now. We now undertake our lives using digital technology just as much as we do actually classic mobility, such as walking and cycling. And as such, we're returning our places and our towns and suburbs to be areas of local living. And you may well have seen that the Paris mayor was re-elected on the promise of transforming Paris into a series of 15-minute cities. So the way our future neighbourhoods are being shaped is less road space, more place space, priority to online plus deliveries, and I'll explain about that in a moment, active travel networks, busier local shops, more local living, lower carbon emissions. There's no compelling reason not to design for that vision or be bold in designing for that vision. Let's take some examples. At a site in Worcestershire, we're working on a scheme that characterises this 15-minute approach. So it's placemaking is at the heart of the design. It's been developed on the principles of the livable street and a mode shift from the historic in the movement strategy. We're looking here at a primary movement network that is the active travel network, alongside which there may be some roads. And the mobility strategy builds on the master planning strategy, where we're looking at in the order of 60, 70, 80% of actual accessibility being internalised within the settlement. Those are day-to-day elements: going to school, visiting the shops for a pint of milk, taking the dog for a walk, those sorts of things, all the sorts of things that can be readily contained within a settlement. And in fact, currently are in many car-borne settlements. We're looking at typically 60 to 70% of movement contained locally within small towns within the UK at the moment. But through COVID, we're seeing infrastructure now evolve to support some of these changes in any event that we're putting into new settlements. What we say from the start is, don't rely upon new technology in its entirety. It's not all about new technology. The rise of classic mobility, 2 feet and 2 wheels, has soared throughout the COVID pandemic. And we expect these behaviours to continue in some form post-COVID. It's an inelastic change, a plastic change. We are now seeing road space reallocation and segregated active travel routes now being created. And we're seeing many towns now redesigning their accessibility networks to prioritise active travel. We're also seeing an uptake in micromobility, such as e-scooters, as people act to minimise their inconvenience. They take advantage of these easy-to-use forms of active travel, particularly in the cities. And so what we're doing to assist with this attitudinal change, if you like, is in our settlements, either retrospectively or new settlements, we're looking at a network of mobility hubs, which are really community hubs. It's a community space where you can do many things. You can take out your e-bike, hire a cargo bike, you can fix your own bike. It may be the place where you sit down for a cup of coffee or get sold a Mars bar, maybe where your bike ride starts. It may also be a micro consolidation centre where your parcels are dropped off and you go and get them. Good thing for physical and mental interaction within the community. Or it might be a place where your parcels dropped off and the ongoing delivery is made by ground drones, which some of you may have seen are rife in Milton Keynes, for instance. They've just done their millionth delivery in Milton Keynes. That's autonomous drones that operate on the footways. As well as these primary mobility hubs, We're also looking at secondary mobility hubs, smaller versions within the rest of the community, maybe not so much in the town centre, maybe in local settlements, in the local areas within the settlement, and tertiary hubs as well. You'll see in Bremen, for instance, that the aim is to have these sorts of hubs, which are just places to pick up your car share or park your bike every 300 metres within the inner city. Now, one of the elements that we're introducing to these mobility hubs, and a very important element, is the community concierge team. And this is wonderful because it opens up a multitude of possibilities, as well as having somebody with a happy smile actually looking after what's happening within the community. They can now manage all of these facilities that we're talking about being both in the mobility hubs and within the local community. They can, for instance, look after travel planning for the local schools. Travel to education is one of the major factors when you look at the way people travel, particularly in the morning peak. And sometimes connected with these mobility hubs, we're looking at associated work hubs, third places, as it were. You'll have seen, without doubt, during the pandemic, that working life has changed. It was changing before the pandemic. It certainly has now. The pandemic may have accelerated that change by 10 years, for instance. And many companies are now saying to their staff, you may work from home or a third place for part of the week, or maybe even all of the week. And so the third place is another form of development that we're looking at in new schemes, a place where you can work from home when you don't want to work from home. So you can go and sit with other people, already made friends, if you like. They don't work at the same company, but they're working just as you are. If you check out, I think it's Brewdog's Desk Dog, £7 a day. You get a place to work, unlimited coffee, you get some friends and a free pint of beer at the end of the day. Now, having said don't rely upon technology, there is, of course, the technology, and it's all really good stuff. Demand responsive transport, buying rides, things like Uber and Lyft, big uptake in that. Potentially autonomous vehicles, ground drones, of course, airborne drones. It's all part of the series of marginal gains that we're now looking at, which is changing the way in which we get accessibility. There is an issue with some of this technology, and that's this. Whereas in the fashion industry, it takes about 3 weeks to get from the catwalk to some form in a shop, it takes us about 10 years in the transport industry. Too long, we must do better. So to summarize, the future is now. We can't stand still any longer. We are going to have to expect change. COVID has made certain of that. Change is good because change means that we can achieve the targets that we are looking to achieve in terms of climate, health, and obesity. We should not be afraid of change and expecting people's attitudes to be different, and indeed to design our transport systems so that they now focus on accessibility and not traffic. And that, designing for the community, capturing the best is what we got, making big plans, not little plans, is what we want to do now. Thank you.